Well,
So, go ahead.
go ahead, Senator Randall, you take it.
Well, I will say, we've had conversations over the last 2 years, that I've been in the legislature around sweetened beverages. I saw this bill come from Senator Robinson, I think, as one of the tools she was proposing to fund public health, which we all agree is in, really desperate need of a sustainable funding source. The testimony, as folks who watched in committee today may have expected or seen, was really mixed. We saw a lot of businesses who were, feeling the weight of this economic situation on their businesses and worried about an additional tax. I think, we haven't caucused on the bill yet amongst the Democrats on the healthcare committee, but we'll certainly continue having conversations and listening to feedback, both positive and negative. Though Senator Frock did note that we had no one testify as other today, which I think is a sign of the really staunch positions on this bill.
Rachel, do you have a follow-up?
Are there other ideas that are being explored to dedicate to public funding that do not include establishment of a new tax?
Well, I think public health funding is a priority. So I think we always have the opportunity that we can fund it through, to some extent, we can fund through the general fund. I think that the hope is that we can do something significant and not just do the minimum. In so many areas, we have over the last, couple of decades have funded and run things on the cheap. And public health is a great example of that, where we've underfunded it. And that, seemed to somewhat fly under the radar until, guess what? Until we need public health. And all of a sudden it's really evident that we've been underfunding. So what we're hoping to do is to find a way to not just do the bare minimum, but to make some robust investments so that we can really help, not just for pandemic, but for all of the important work that public health does.
Yeah, I just want to add in, this is, where I work in my other job, and is in public health. And this has been a 20-year conversation. We've known for 20 years that public health in Washington State is woefully underfunded, and that underfunding is coming home to roost. One of the challenges, we can certainly look at general fund money, and there has been general fund money invested. It hasn't been enough. So a dedicated source, I think, is important. And I think the dedicated sources that have been proposed that are out there this year are very highly connected to public health. I don't know what one, which will make it through, but one of the challenges we always have with public health is that we tend to save the healthcare system money. But those are two different systems, the public health system and the healthcare system. So sometimes the healthcare system isn't always as interested in funding, but that's the place where we're saving money and saving lives. So
next we will go to Austin Jenkins of the Northwest News Network. Austin, go ahead.
Thanks, Aaron. Senator Billy, can you tell us what the plan is and the timing for the capital gains tax, and also explain the justification for the emergency clause in that bill?
Sure. So the timing, the bill is now in rules, and it'll obviously need to get pulled from rules. I don't think you'll see that in the next day or two. I think that there's still some discussion on some final tweaks, and so I don't think it'll come out of, we have a rules meeting tomorrow. I don't expect it to come out tomorrow. So I think we would probably look to one of the upcoming rules meetings after that. I think the reason that the sponsor put the emergency clause on, and the Ways and Means Committee passed it with the emergency clause, is because it goes to fund childcare, and we have a childcare emergency, and we know this bill is going to take a little while to implement. The DOR needs some time to ramp up. And we also know that the opponents have said that they're going to file a lawsuit to challenge it in court, the constitutionality. And, the court is going to have to make a decision on that. So let's get that started so that we can then invest in childcare, which we know is not only important for families and for children, but also for businesses. It's a top business priority as well. And let's also get work on tax fairness, because that's the other thing funded in this bill is a tax fairness fund. Those are both emergencies. We're 50th out of 50 states in tax fairness. And I don't think we should wait any longer than we need to help middle class and working class families to have some better tax equity in this state.
Austin, do you have a follow?
I guess just briefly, the Republicans are saying that you guys are going to fast track this to get out ahead of the March revenue forecast, which is likely to be positive. And once that's out, it will undercut your argument for needing a new tax. Can you just respond?
Well, I just don't agree with that at all. That makes it sound like we're passing a tax because we want to pass taxes. I can guarantee you that's not the case. This is a way to fund really important policy like childcare, which works on so many levels and changing the trajectory of a child's life and helping people to go to work and helping employers. It's about funding that priority and doing it in a way that also makes our tax code more fair. That's why we want to move forward with this. And I don't know, maybe it won't pass till after the revenue forecast. We haven't decided exactly when it'll come to the floor, but the revenue forecast is not a factor in the decision on when we are going to run that bill.
It's hard, Austin, it's hard to argue that we've been trying to move toward tax fairness too fast in this state. That's just an argument that doesn't hold water.
Next, we'll go to Drew Mikkelsen at King 5. Drew, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. So we've seen the hashtag Taxapalooza come up again from the Republicans. We've already talked about the capital gains and the sugary drinks tax. What about the gas tax? Where do you see that landing? And how do you respond to those who say we can balance this upcoming budget without any new taxes?
Well, I mean, I would just say that, you know, our transportation budget is in much worse shape, much worse shape than our operating budget is in. And neither of them are in tremendous shape right now. But, you know, Chair Fye on the House side did 90 different stakeholder meetings over the course of the interim to talk about and identify what was needed and if we needed to move forward on a transportation package this year. And the answer was resoundingly yes, across the board, everywhere. And, you know, I think he's talked a lot about the themes that he heard from that, which one of which was maintenance and preservation has got to be a higher priority for us. But he also talks a lot, you know, we have a failing bridge joining Oregon and Washington that we need to move forward on. So that kind of work does not come for free and could not be budgeted. I guess I should also talk about culverts in there too, but we would not be able to do virtually any of that work on the transportation budget that we have right now and the revenue that we have coming in right now. So if we want to move forward on that, as Chair Fye was told in these 90 stakeholder meetings, we're going to have to do a package. Now, how that package ends up looking, I think that is all about negotiation between the House and Senate and the governor's office. And that's, I think, what we're starting to engage in now.
Yeah, you know, and I just think one thing, you know, with the idea of we could balance the budget without revenue, that remains to be seen. But even if that ends up being the case after the revenue forecast, I think the question is, do we want to do the bare minimum? Or is this the moment when we actually can invest? We talked about it with public health. Do we want to do it on the cheap? Or do we want to really be robust in helping our communities and families and small businesses to recover successfully and for the long term? I think it's the latter. I think this is the time for us to be bold, to take action, to be leaders, and to move our state forward in recovery in a way that we can be really proud when we look back in a few years and say, this worked. We had a sustained, robust recovery that worked for everyone.
Drew, do you have a follow?
I do not. Thank you.
Great. Next, we'll go to Sarah Gensler with McClatchy. Sarah, go ahead.
Hey, this is for Senator Billig. Do you have an idea of the timeline for when the Senate may bring Senator Cooter's open carry bill to the floor for a vote?
I don't know specifically. I think it's still in rules, so it'll have to get pulled from rules. We'll have to caucus on it. But that is, it's a bill that I think there's strong support for, but we do need to go through the process.
Senator Fall?
I don't think so. No, not right now. Thanks.
Okay. Next, we'll go to Jerry Cornfield with the Everett Herald. Jerry, go ahead.
Just staying on the tax theme for a moment, a couple of larger concepts maybe you could talk about. On the capital gains, you mentioned the emergency clause was in part to get the legal battle going if there's going to be one, but in so doing, you take away the public's ability to just roll back and repeal it without a lawsuit, but repeal it by referendum. So why not allow that to go forward if it was to go forward? And if it didn't, then they could sue.
I mean, if that's what you're arguing for, then we'll certainly consider your comments as we will every constituents. But look, Jerry, this is something that's been talked about for years, and we do have an emergency. We have an emergency when it comes to childcare, and we have an emergency when it comes to tax fairness, and that's the reason it's there. I'm sure that there will be an amendment to take it off so we can have a public, open, transparent debate about it on the floor of the Senate, and then the body representing every district of this state will make a decision.
And this is Representative Morgan. I would like to add on to that yes, that sometimes it may seem like we're trying to be regressive, but we're actually not. But we do have to remember that we saw the disparities in terms of communities of color that were affected by COVID. And we've been saying that for a long time, way before the pandemic even got here. But if we are truly going to be inclusive and practice racial equity in terms of making sure that all communities get services and resources and vaccines properly, then everybody's going to have to pay their fair share. It has been known and on regression that 18% of the taxes were put on the backs of communities of color, low income. This is just not justice. And I'm excited to share with Speaker Jenkins and Senator Billig that we are moving forward in ensuring that we take all communities with us as we move forward.
Jerry, do you have a follow?
Sure. Just on the idea that the Democrats' collection of taxes that are out there will make the system less regressive. The sweetened beverage tax that came up, that'll raise the price of drinks, and that folks who are buying them, that the low-income families will see more of their income go to buy those drinks. The gas tax will affect the working class and more so than the rich. And the even the covered lives assessment, while you brought it down, that still will hit those with the least amount of income to spend on health insurance, will hit them. So how are these proposals actually equalizing a tax system if those with the least disposable income are going to be paying all of them?
Can I respond?
Yeah, please do, Rep. Morgan.
We have got to get away from this idea of either or, right? In terms of what we use in our budgeting or in our legislation. If we're truly going to reach inclusion and make sure that everybody has equal access to healthcare, employment, et cetera, in the state of Washington, we're going to have a larger lens, and that's going to come through an equity lens, as the House has been practicing for the last year and getting ready for legislation that ensures that communities of color are being taken care of as we're moving forward. So it's not about pitting legislation together on which tax is better, but we need to remember the true definition of regressive tax is more so about who you're taxing, and that's taxing low income at the highest level. There are taxes that need to be created or still kept in place because that's what helps us to take care of our people. So let's be clear, when we're talking about legislation in terms of what tax do we choose, do we have a tax that's going to put 25 cents on Comcast so that we could ensure that all students have access to broadband and access to devices? Or are we talking about a sugary drink tax that's going to help the health department? It's really neither here nor there. It's which one is best to get us to where we need to go. And we have said it in the Senate, in both chambers and in the House. This is the way we feel that it should go to make sure we're being inclusive.
Thank you. Next, we will go to Joe O'Sullivan with the Seattle Times. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, to piggyback off of Jerry's question there, it seems like there's a consensus this year around funding the working families tax credit, which would be one way to make the system more progressive from the other side of the tax things. Is leadership willing to do that without a new funding source this year?
I think, that's a question really for our budget writers who are in the process, right in the thick of it right now with coming up with the chair's budget drafts. And so where we come down on that is really, I think we'll have to wait and see their drafts there. I do want to say though, again, this is about, people say, hey, everything's balanced. By the way, we should do the working families tax credit. By the way, we should do a big investment in public health. By the way, we should do a big investment in childcare. By the way, we should, but don't pass any new taxes. And that's just not realistic that we're going to do all of these big investments and do something like the working families tax credit and do it without any additional revenue. So anyway, that's a process that's happening right now, and that's all in the mix.
And I would just add to that, one of the ways that people have started to say they want to fund some of these big things is with the rainy day fund, which would be great if the rainy day fund provided ongoing funding for them. It doesn't. It's one-time only funding. So we really have to look for, what is something that can keep all of the things that Senator Billig talked about funded for the long term.
Joe, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, we saw a lot of the law enforcement and police accountability bills pass out of committee. What is the thinking for getting them on the floor, and are there a few that are prioritized at this point?
Well, I mean, I think the thinking for getting them off of the floor is actually to, talk about them in caucus, make sure we have caucus support for them, and then move them to the floor for debate, and hopefully that we'll have broad support across both caucuses in the House for increased police accountability and adding a lot more equity to our policing strategies. So I think that's the strategy. I think I'm not being overly optimistic in the sense that we do know that a number of them maybe are likely to take a lot of time on the floor, and we will plan for that so that we can move our police accountability measures forward. These are some of the most well-worked bills. They've been being worked on for months by a leadership group with lots of input, a leadership group of the House Democrats, and lots of input from stakeholders. I wouldn't argue to you that we have complete agreement amongst all of them, but I think we're continuing to work to bring people together and to move the bills.
I will just add that last week we saw the passage of Senator Wynn's arbitration bill with really incredible bipartisan support. And so I think that that idea that this is a partisan issue is not really correct this year. We're seeing great collaboration, just like Speaker Jenkins was talking about in the House, to make sure that we're, hearing all the voices and coming up with the best possible policies possible. This week, we're also expecting a bill about duty to intervene, sponsored by Senator Gingrich on the floor. And I think that's another one where, it won't be a partisan vote. We'll see bipartisan support of this work.
Next, we'll go to Melissa Santos with Crosscut. Melissa, go ahead.
Hi there. I wanted to ask specifically about the qualified immunity bill. I think that's House Bill 1202, or that would give a state cause of action for suing police officers or and of sort of their personal capacity You guys know what it is better than I do. But that one seems to be a little bit more difficult, perhaps a little more opposition. I wondered if leadership and perhaps Representative Morgan could address how that bill fits into the picture, and if that bill is how important it is for you personally to kind of see that get through as part of this package, and what difficulties you're sort of encountering and having to work out with that legislation at this point. And maybe Senator Randall, I know you're working on it too, so.
Did you want to go first, Speaker Jenkins?
Well, I'm happy to say a few words. Actually, it turns out that while Rep. Morgan is chair of our members of color at caucus, she's not on the police accountability leadership team, so she probably hasn't worked on this bill as much as some other of her colleagues have. She may have something to say about it, though. I mean, my understanding of this bill, Melissa, and when things get into rules, this one has just moved out of committee and into rules, but is that when police misconduct is found, it does trigger an ability to get a civil recovery, which seems fair considering the kind of damage that's been done to people in this state when there's been police misconduct. I think these are all bills that we're going to have to caucus on in our caucus, have a full dialogue in caucus about them. It's a Representative Ty's bill. She's worked it very hard. I know she'll continue to work it and answer questions. But I do believe this is part of our police accountability package, and one that we want to see if there's caucus support for and move it forward if there is. Rep. Morgan.
Yes, thank you, Speaker Jenkins. You are absolutely correct. I wasn't a part of that group there, but the reality is that we do watch those bills as it affects my community, right? So I need to say that, yes, there are Black members and members of color who are running these police accountability bills. But the reality is it's not a communities of color issue in terms of what is happening in terms of those agencies and such. The only issue that we come out with is being murdered in the streets, as Manny Ellis was murdered in my district, or Yoheen in Lakewood. So it should be put in its proper perspective that, yes, I support that. And to just think because I'm a Black woman that I'm already a part of that leadership or formation of those bills, I'm pretty much side-eyeing, because that's where we're trying to get to in the House when we said racial equity, is that was what we're leading with, is to not put all the pressure on members of color, but that we share that work in our larger caucus with our allies, accomplices, and co-conspirators. So, but as the Deputy Majority Floor Leader, I will be working with Speaker Jenkins and our floor leader, Representative Stonier, in how we bring those bills forward and how we fight them on the floor.
Melissa, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, I just want to say, Representative Morgan, I thought I remembered you saying something in committee when I watched the hearing on this topic, which is why I asked you about it. I guess we heard during that hearing, sorry to keep going on it, but we heard during that hearing that people say that there's already a remedy for this. People already can sue. I guess under federal law. I'm still asking the Trial Lawyers or Association about that, but do you agree with that? Do you agree that this would be duplicative, or that this would provide a really valuable means to, I guess, seek what you're talking about, Speaker Jenkins, to get some sort of recompense, I guess?
Melissa, I haven't studied the bill in detail, but I would say I tend to have a fair amount of confidence in my colleagues and my committee chairs. And if they thought that the federal civil rights action, which is authorized, was appropriate or enough, then they would not have moved the bill forward. So I'm going to just presume that they did not think that was the case. Now, I haven't studied the bill enough to know that, and that's something that I'll look at before we come to the floor. But again, I come to this job from having been a committee chair, and I have a high level of trust in my committee chairs to examine those issues and not move bills forward if there's already an adequate remedy.
And I would just add that, yes, there may have been federal rules in place, and we've also had 8 civil rights acts in this country, yet my Black and brown people are still being murdered in the street. So we have to take it a step further in the state of Washington. Regardless if there's federal rules there, we also are saying in the state of Washington that not in our state will this be transpiring of murdering innocent people, and they just happen to be Black or brown. Enough is enough.
Next, we'll go to Essex Porter with Cairo TV. Essex.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Let's stay with the topic of police accountability and reform. First, for leadership, you've touched some on this, but specifically, there's legislation to ban chokeholds. There's legislation to regulate the use of police dogs, and there's legislation for independent investigations of police killings. Where does that legislation stand now? Is it moving forward, or is it getting to the place where this legislation is in jeopardy?
Those are bills, I think you're referring, those are House bills, and they're moving forward. I believe if they're not all in rules right now, they are moving out of appropriations into rules. I think the independent investigations bill is governor request legislation. House and Senate have been working on it together for a long time with stakeholders. Essex, I would say it's the opposite of dying. I think they're all flourishing. And also the work that's going on, especially on the tactics bill that you referenced, there have been a lot of issues, for example, around using police dogs. And so I think there's been a lot of negotiation going on around that and what's the appropriate limitation. And if you look at that tactics bill, where it started, where it's at now, Representative Johnson I think is doing an extraordinary job of meeting with interested folks to find the right balance there. So I think these bills can still continue to thrive.
Essex, you have a follow-up?
Yes, if I could ask Representative Morgan a follow-up. As you know, tens of thousands of people took to the streets, lent their voices to protests. When we get to the end of this legislative session, will their demands for police accountability and equity and the end of police abuse, will those demands be met?
Well, thank you for that question, Essex, but I don't have a crystal ball. I don't even have the speaker's predict-a-pen right now to predict what the outcome is going to be. But the truth of the matter is, we would hope, now that a third of the caucus is members of color, that we have great and adequate support behind ensuring that legislation that hits our first priority, as Speaker Jenkins and I keep mentioning, that racial equity is our #1 priority. So I would think that I have good hope with Speaker Jenkins that it's going to come through fine. And we're used to fighting. We're Democrats. So therefore, if it comes to the floor with the fight, we're ready. That's how I'm a Black woman. I've been fighting from the beginning. This is not different for me. So bring it along by caucus behind me and with my other colleagues. It's awesome. And then working bicamerally with the Senate and ensuring that communities of color are properly represented and are properly getting the resources that they need. All of these things that we talked about today come back to racial equity, not just equity. When we talk about racial equity, we're talking about going back and picking up the people who were the most impacted by regressive taxes, by over enforcement, by chokeholds, by no-knock warrants, etc. Vaccines, carbon, environment, all of this comes down to racial equity, and that I am proud that we as Democrats have said enough is enough. We're going back. We're going to ensure that everybody is whole and everybody has proper, equitable access to every area that we're talking about here today. We eagerly are awaiting that state equity office to get those doors open, as Dr. Johnson now has been picked as their executive director. Stay tuned, folks. This is about to get real interesting, and I'm excited.
Essex, I just want to add in one thing really quick. My quick answer is no, and here's why. It's taken us a long time to get here. No matter how much action we take this year, even if everybody was really happy with it, we will not be done. This is not focus on this for 1 year and be done. It's taken us hundreds of years to get where we're at. And it's not going to take us hundreds of years to get to a better place, but it's going to take us more than 1 year.
Thank you. Thank you both.
All right, thank you, everyone. That's all we have time for today. I'll turn it back over to the members for some closing remarks.
Senator Randall, you want to go?
Sure. I heard over and over and over from our colleagues today, and really the questions focused on how are we going to support the hard-working families in Washington who are struggling. They'll continue to struggle if we have a better budget forecast. You know, in the next month, they have been struggling before we were hit by the pandemic, and they'll continue struggling afterwards. And now is the year that we need to ensure that we're investing the money in the programs that catch people when they're falling. We need to make sure that we are making big progress on our childcare crisis, a childcare emergency before us this year. We need to invest funds in disability services and supports, a place where we continue to be at the bottom of the list of states making investments in those resources for families. We need to invest in programs like TANF and basic food assistance so that folks who are hard hit, not just by the pandemic, but by changing economies and by the emergencies that hit all of us sometimes, have those supports. And the way that we do that is by turning our upside down tax code right side up, and by ensuring that folks who have been continuing to profit during this global pandemic are part of the solution. So I feel really proud to be among our caucus and to work alongside the members of the House, because I see us every day putting those values first, ensuring that we are looking for ways to support families who are struggling. And so I can't wait to get on the floor this week and keep making progress forward.
If I could add on to Senator Randall's comments, and I would take it one step further in that we still have to dismantle racism inside of our systems. And so that's what we continually work on, no matter what piece of legislation it is. We're looking at how does this impact. And the biggest thing for me is land ownership and home ownership to make Black African Americans whole and get them out of abject poverty and all these barriers that were put in place. This is a starting point. Just as Juneteenth as a state paid holiday is a starting point of reconciliation, of acknowledging that there have been over 400 plus years of oppression against one demographic group in this country, in this state. So I'm proud, as well as Senator Randall has mentioned, to serve with my colleagues in the House and the Senate, that we're all on the same page, that we get it. And the state of Washington should be proud as well that you have us at the helm, ensuring that every Washingtonian gets the resources and gets what they need to be successful and a productive member of society.
Thank you all for joining us today. We will see you next week.